All right, guys, good afternoon. So today's notes are for Thursday. When I originally created them, I had planned for them to be Wednesday, but we just backed things up a day. So we're going to do a couple warm-up problems together just to review some of our concepts from earlier in the week. Then we'll take some notes on the remaining ideas related to circumference. And then you'll have some time to get started with your homework. So let's jump in. All right, so on our last worksheet, everybody did a pretty good job with this, but what I want us to do is just to match up some of these words to their picture. So I want you to do some highlighting. So for instance, I'm going to highlight radius in red, and then I'm going to highlight the line that shows the radius. So the radius is the line that goes from the center point to the edge of a circle, so it's just half of a circle. The diameter is the line that goes all the way across a circle through the center. So the diameter is the longer line. And just as a hint, I always think of it as the longer word too. Radius is the shorter word, so it's the shorter line. Diameter is the longer word, so it's the longer line. And then, of course, we have the circumference. And think of that word circle, which is the first part of circumference. That word circle, it starts with circ, like circle. And so I always just think of it as the circle. It's the outer edge. It's the perimeter of the circle. All right, circumference is the outside. Okay, so now that we've reviewed the parts of the circle, we're going to just review finding some of these measurements. And again, you guys were doing a nice job with this, and I'm just going to give us a couple quick reminders for today. So when we have a diameter of 8 inches, then that means in order to find the radius, well, the radius is just going to be half of that diameter. So if the diameter is 8, then the radius would just be 4, right? So the radius is 4 inches. All right, now, so for circumference, and I'm going to prompt you about this strategy all the time because we're going to start using a lot of different formulas. And so I always want you to write out your formula. Circumference equals pi times diameter. So in order to find circumference, we plug in the numbers that we have. Pi is 3.14, and our diameter is 8. All right, so then you get out your trusty calculator. 3.14 times 8 will give you 25.12. My pen's being a bit weird. 25.12, and then we always put units. So 25.12 inches. Make sure you get those units on there. All right, so now if we have a radius of 5, we can just multiply that by 2 to get our diameter. So if the radius is 5, then the diameter is 10 inches. All right. And then we have our formula for circumference. Circumference equals pi times diameter. So C equals 3.14 times 10. All right, so on my trusty calculator, I do 3.14 times 10. And whenever I multiply anything by 10, it's really just going to move that decimal over to make it one decimal place bigger. So it's just 31.4 inches. 31.4 inches. All right, so hopefully we're feeling pretty good about going between diameter radius and finding circumference of a whole circle. So now that we've learned how to find diameter, radius, and circumference of a whole circle, we're going to start to do that same concept for a semicircle. So a semicircle is really just a half circle, right? This whole circle here, and I'm just going to draw an example. If I were to finish this circle, right, it would go all the way around just like that. So finding the perimeter of a semicircle is not necessarily another formula that we have to have memorized. We just need to think logically about our formula. So think to yourself right now, say it out loud. What is the formula for circumference of a circle? Well, hopefully you just yelled at your screen and you said circumference of a circle is pi times diameter. Okay, Well, but now let's think about if this is the circumference of a circle is pi times diameter for a whole circle. Well, what would I have to do then to get rid of this whole part here? Right, so I'm going to have this whole part is going to be gone now because it's just a semicircle. So I'm going to then divide my whole circle in half because it's only half of a circle. So I divide it by 2. But I'm going to show you one other thing. Let's pretend I have this whole circle, and then I divide this whole circle in half, so I've cut it in half. Now think for a second, what is this circle missing compared to this circle? Well, this one has no bottom, but this one does. It's got its diameter right here. So we took our whole circle and we cut it in half, right? We took this part away, so we cut it in half. But now we need to add on this diameter line. We need to add that line back because this one has a diameter line. It's not just an arc like this, it has a diameter line. So we're going to add that diameter back in to make that semicircle. So plus diameter. Okay, so this is the formula for finding the perimeter of a semicircle, but there are going to be times where your semicircle may not have this part when we do some compound shapes later. So you have to be able to think logically. Does it have the diameter added in or does it not? Okay, so that's what I mean about we can't just necessarily memorize formulas because then that will get us into trouble later. So we do want to memorize this part of our formula, and then we need to look at the shape that we're finding to decide what do we do next. Here's circumference of a circle. Circumference is cut in half because it's a half a circle, so we divide by 2, and we have to add that diameter back on because this shape has a bottom layer. All right, so now that we have our formula for this problem, let's go ahead and solve it. I'm just going to erase this and get it out of our way here. So circumference equals 3.14 times our diameter, which is 2. And then we're going to divide by 2, and we're going to add that diameter of 2 back on. All right, so I'm going to do PEMDAS, right? So PEMDAS tells me I'm going to do my top part first. So 3.14 times 2 is going to give me 6.28. And then I divide that by 2, and I'm going to get 3.14. And then I'm going to add 2 to that. So I will end up with C equals 5.14 feet. And that is my final answer. Now, for solving this equation, guys, we don't necessarily have to do each part at a time, okay? You could just type these things into your calculator, but you need to know and remember those order of operations because depending on your calculator, it might mix up your order of operations a little bit. All right, let's do another one. So we're going to, again, find the perimeter of a semicircle, but this time we have our radius. All right, so let's think again for one quick second. If I have a whole circle and the formula for finding circumference or perimeter of a whole circle is C equals pi times diameter. But in my shape, I don't have a whole circle. I have a half of a circle. So since I have to delete half of my circle, then I'm going to divide by 2. All right, but then in my circle in my picture here, it has a diameter. So that means I have to add a diameter back to my circle. So plus diameter. All right, great. So now that we've got our formula, let's get started. Now in my equation, I need a diameter, but right now I have a radius. My radius is 15. So if I just multiply that by 2, I would get a diameter of 30 inches, right? The diameter is the whole way across. And this 15 is just for the radius. All right, so I've got C equals 3.14, and I'm just filling in my numbers for my variables. My diameter is 30. I'll divide all of that by 2, and then I'll add on my diameter of 30. Okay, so 3.14 times 30 is going to give me 94.2. I'm going to cut that in half because it's half of a circle, and then I will add my diameter back on. So 94.2 divided by 2 is going to give me 47.1, and I have to add on my diameter of 30. So my final circumference is 77.1, and don't forget we need units, and my units in this case is inches. So the circumference of this half circle is 77.1. All right, guys, great job. I know that's a little bit tricky, but good job with that. And make sure if you didn't get all that written down that you pause the video and jot it down. Okay, so the next part of our set of notes here is that we're going to just learn how to solve backwards. And solving backwards is the same thing as doing 1- and 2-step equations, which we have already learned and practiced and done a lot with. So just as a quick review, let's just review how to solve a 1-step equation. So our main job is to isolate the variable by doing the inverse operation, right? The opposite operation. And remember, isolate the variable means to get that variable alone. So in this equation, we have an x, and our x is all by itself. And if it helps you to divide your equation in half, then go ahead and do that at the equal sign. And 4 and x are multiplying. It's 4 times x. So we do the inverse. We do the opposite. 4 times x divided by 4. Because that way 4 and 4 cancel each other out so that we are just left with x. But whatever we do to one side of our equation, we do to the other. And so then we've got 25 divided by 4. And so we have an answer of 6.25. All right, let's try another one. Now this one just has decimals. Same thing, it's just got some decimals in it. And this looks a lot like the equations that we're going to see with circumference, diameter, etc. All right, so 17.27 equals 3.14 times diameter, or times d, right? So d and x are the same thing, they're just variables, right? So when we look at our equations, we're going to see that variable d quite a bit, and it's just representing the diameter multiplying times pi, 3.14. Look at that. So it's still the same thing as 4x equals 25. Our job is to isolate the variable. So we do that by, since 3.14 is multiplying times d, we divide by 3.14. And whatever we do on one side, we do to the other side. So our 3.14s cancel each other out, so we're isolating d. We got d alone. And then on our calculator, 17.27 divided by 3.14 is going to equal 5.5. All right, and that is how we solve one-step equations. So now we're just going to practice this with 2 problems. We're just working backwards with circumference to find a measurement. So this is telling us that the circumference of a circle is 62.8 inches. Find its diameter. All right, well, so our circumference formula, I see the word circumference here. So I'm going to write out my formula of circumference. C equals pi times diameter. Please make sure you have that written on your sheet right now. And it wants me to find the diameter. It doesn't give me the diameter, it's giving me circumference. So I'm going to fill in my variables and substitute my variables with the numbers that I know. I know that the circumference is 62.8. So instead of the letter C, I'm substituting with 62.8 equals, I know the number for pi, 3.14. I do not know the diameter, so times d. All right, now this looks exactly like those problems that we've just practiced. So I'm going to isolate d. I've got to find d. So if I divide both sides by 3.14, divide by 3.14 here to cancel out and get d, that means I have to divide by 3.14 here. All right, so 3.14 divided by 3.14 leaves me with just d. And so on my calculator, I type in 62.8 divided by 3.14, and I get 20. All right, so D equals 20 inches. Please make sure to get those units labeled. All right, let's try one more. So again, we have the circumference. The circumference of a circle is 157 centimeters. Find its radius. All right, so we've got one extra step in this problem. So I start by writing out my formula. Do this on your paper too, please. Circumference equals pi times diameter. All right, I know my circumference. I'm going to substitute my numbers for my variables. C is 157. Pi is 3.14. Diameter is what I do not know. Now it's not asking me to find diameter, it's asking me to find radius. But in order to find radius, I need to find the diameter. Okay, so once I find diameter, then I can easily get the radius. So let's start out just like before, we're just solving for D. So we need to isolate that variable by doing the inverse operation. So I divide both sides by 3.14. 3.14 divided by 3.14 leaves me with D on the right side. And 157 divided by 3.14 leaves me with 50 on this side. So 50 is my diameter. So that means my radius is going to equal 25. If my diameter of my circle is 50 centimeters, then half of that, my radius, will be 25. All right, and then we need to make sure we get our centimeters in there. And that's it. Okay, so half of this unit, guys, is really just reading the questions carefully to see what we know and what we need to find. And then we just need to use those big brains and figure out which equation to use and how to fill in those numbers. Okay, guys, that's it. I want you to just do the 5 practice problems for homework and get that submitted into Schoology. Good job today.